Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Jillian Holzer. I'm the Communications Manager with WRI's Food Program. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We are going to walk you through how WRI has been able to significantly reduce food waste in our global headquarters here in Washington, D.C., as well as explain our new Office Food Waste Challenge, which we hope you and your office will join. So we'll kick off with two presentations and then save time at the end to take your questions. Just a note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on WRI's events page by the end of this week. So without further ado, today's speakers are Esben Larsen, who is a fellow with WRI, and Shengyin, who is Global Sustainability Manager with WRI. Esben?
Thank you very much, Jillian, and good morning to you all. Today, this is focused on fighting food waste in the office, and the framework here at WRI is that we are around 400 employees at our headquarters, just so you have an idea of how many people we are here. When we look into food waste globally, we waste more than 1 billion tons of food from farm to table each year, and that leads to 940 billion in economic losses. So it's a vital thing to look into. And are we looking at the global greenhouse gas emissions? It's 8% that food waste and food loss counts for. And was it a country, it would be the third largest emitter in the world. So it shows you something about why this is necessary to focus on, and that is also why we have looked upon it here at the headquarters for WRI. Globally, we have a framework established in the SDGs that by 2030, we should halve food waste per capita and also at the retail and consumer levels. At the same time, we want to reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. We know that the food waste in the Western world is very much in the kitchen and restaurants and cantinas, whereas the challenge in the developing countries are mainly the post-harvest losses. At WRI, we thought that we also could do something practically in the office. One thing is to debate this issue and develop solutions that are doable around the world, but we also had to look at our own daily life here in the office. And how could we contribute to realizing this targets? And that's why we have launched the Office Food Waste Challenge. Globally, we see that a lot of strategies are made when we talk about setting targets, and our global strategy to achieve this is from target to measure and to act. So in 2017, WRI began taking a bite out of food waste in our Washington, D.C. headquarters. The target was, as I mentioned, 12.3 to halve food waste in 2030. So it was clear for us. But the challenge was then, how do we discover what our food waste is and what can we do? So our next step was to establish a benchmark through measurement, which was done by a small team of excellent and dedicated staff volunteering to sort through the trash to figure out how much and what kind of waste we actually produce here in the office. This investigation showed that we were sending 14 pounds of food to the landfill each day. Not much, but adding up, it is actually 1.5 tons of food in a year, or weight-wise, what resembles 3,000 loaves of bread. In this slide, you see how we have done this practically by digging through our trash. And as I said, we have had dedicated staff that has been doing this. And when we first had established our measurement, then we began to act. So, armed with information about the type and source of food waste, we went after the hotspots in our office. It could be leftovers from catered events, uneaten lunches by staff, and forgotten food in the office kitchen refrigerators. To address the catering waste, our office events manager instructed staff simply to cut the amount they ordered for an event by 25%. But still, we would have leftovers. So what to do about that? Well, that led to a whole new group of staff, not the beach boys, but the beeline boys and girls, which are hungry interns to get free food outside our conference center, rushing there too when a leftover food email was sent to the staff. But we also started a composting program with green composting bins with clear visual instructions in our kitchen and coffee break areas. That has been very helpful in the sorting. And to address leftovers in our refrigerators, our office facilities manager started to inform staff by email in advance of when refrigerators would be cleaned out so staff use up their food in time. So very practical approaches to do this. And the good news is it really worked. In 1 year, we reduced our food waste by more than 75%. And as I said earlier on, when we started, our office wasted approximately 14 pounds of food daily. That equals more than 1.5 tons annually. And today, we are less than 3 pounds daily in our food waste. So it is really a good task we have been through here, and it has opened a lot of our staff's eyes on what can you actually do. So the good news is it works. And what can you do? Well, we have made a web page, the Office Food Waste Challenge, where you can go and sign up. It's of course a voluntary commitment to reduce food waste where you work, but it's also a very good page to be inspired to what you can do. And it's so easy to begin, but because as we mentioned, the target, measure, act approach is really what you do. Step 1, set a target. Step 2, measure your food waste. And step 3, take some action. So to conclude, I hope that you will voluntarily engage in this, and that you also will become food waste angels and food waste hunters in your office space, so we can do something about this problem. Thank you very much, Shengyin.
Thank you, Esben. So now let's go to Shengyin Zhu, who is Global Sustainability Manager here at WRI and has led a lot of the efforts, including our waste audit. She can walk you through some tips for how to get started, and to let you know that on the Office Food Waste Challenge's webpage, which is officefoodwastechallenge.org, we've got a number of resources to help you out, which you can see on your screen just now. And some of the tips that Shengyin will be walking you through in a moment, you can find here also.
Thank you, Jillian, and welcome everyone. So most of my tips are on that second document from the left on the slide. I cannot emphasize how useful the document is for a range of audiences, from those that may have in-house canteens or cafeterias and food production, to offices like ours that are break rooms and coffee stations that aren't producing food on site. The Food Waste Challenge can really apply to almost all sizes and all types of organizations. So the tips that I'm going to be sharing today range in terms of audience. So for example, if you are on-site producers of food, if you have a cafeteria and a vendor that you work with, that'll be your key partner in doing any kind of food waste action. Working with the vendor to ask them to serve smaller portions, reduce the amount of food customers take by going trayless. Those are very small and practical ways, but help nudge people to reduce the amount of food waste that they produce. Other little things that we've seen in different organizations include the ways that leftovers are treated, offering doggy bags or containers for people to bring leftovers home, giving them an opportunity to not just throw it out. And then signage, really reinforcing the actions that you're doing. And that can be a number of different ways that you can talk about it. It may not be just from an environmental perspective, but from a cost savings, or from the right thing to do, or from even there's a number of interesting campaigns that take it from the perspective of food and personifying food. So there's a lot of fun things that you can do with your partners and vendors through that perspective. Those that don't have on-site food production, though, there's still quite a huge impact. When we started at WRI, The challenge was that we couldn't find a compost vendor, and we were told that because we didn't do food on site, that we wouldn't really have a lot of compost at the end of the day. That was not necessarily true. Thanks to our waste audit, which is a very important first step, we were able to assess how much food waste we had in the office as a percentage of our total waste stream, and it was a very significant portion, about 30 to 40% of the total waste. And when you convert that over to GHG emissions, it makes a huge impact by treating that properly. But at the front end, it's still very important. One of the tips is really to think about how you prevent food waste before it gets to the compost bin. So working with our staff, developing communications and engagement campaigns around sharing food, offering leftovers to other folks, even working with your janitorial staff on refrigerator cleanouts. They're not a fun activity, and you don't think there's too much practical improvement to make, but when we also started our challenge, we noticed that our janitors were throwing out refrigerator leftovers. And so even working with them to time and see what resources they would need to help us properly compost the food waste portion and then recover the Tupperware and the plastic containers was an important step in the journey, and it really helped us get to where we are today. So some of the stats, even over time, we've done 6 waste audits internally. We run them approximately quarterly. We've gone from over 14 pounds of food waste to our most recent audit last month being under 2 pounds total going to landfill. And then for all sizes of organizations, if you do catered events, one of the other important things, as Esben had noted, is to reduce the amount of food ordered. We do a number of different sustainability initiatives around waste, and source reduction is one of the key actions to stop the extra stuff from coming in and then start dealing with the waste at the other end. So really getting creative about what you order and how you order, avoiding those prepackaged lunch boxes, which really, you know, not everyone wants a whole sandwich, chips, apple, individually wrapped and then further wrapped in a box. But going for platters where people can select the right portion for them, and then using your RSVP counts and reducing that from, you know, if you have 100 people coming to an event to only 75. Usually that still leads to leftovers for many of our events. And then finally, some cross-cutting strategies. Just in general, offices can take a lot of different approaches to assigning buy-in, getting engagement from various staff. We have a number of staff that are very environmentally focused at WRI, but when we started our food waste campaign, it was a small portion of dedicated folks that wanted to see composting, that wanted to see a reduction in food waste. So when we started, it was grassroots, but our CEO and president, Andrew Steer, further supported that and drove the message home among our senior leadership and throughout the rest of our staff. So it takes 2 sides on the communication front. And then further, that communication piece, really finding ways to raise awareness on a number of levels. We have signage throughout our offices on how to sort waste, but we also celebrate certain activities like Food Waste Day, appointing food waste champions. Those are all activities that will allow people to see and find resources throughout the office to participate. And for us, we've also found that there's a lot of alignment with other sustainability actions. We have a zero waste target for the rest of our waste at the office. And we ran a number of plastic-free campaigns that ask people to reduce plastics. But actually, through those activities, we've also been encouraging food waste reduction through there by encouraging folks to bring in their own lunches rather than going to food trucks that produce a lot of plastic waste. We were also indirectly encouraging folks to reduce food waste through that means. So there's a lot of opportunities for synergies as well across your sustainability initiatives and projects. So I really encourage folks to think about the different audiences, find ways to engage both your leadership and your staff, and then use our resources. The challenge itself, the documents, the checklists that are produced on the website that Jillian shared are a great start, and happy to field any questions moving forward too.
Thank you, Shengyin. So just a reminder that you can find these resources at officefoodwastechallenge.org, and with that, we will begin to open it up to questions. And I'd like to say that we are happy to be joined by Lucas Cho, who is one of our employees here at WRI and also works a lot on sustainability issues within the office. So you have a couple ways that you can ask a question. You can either hit the button on your screen that looks a little bit like a hand, or you can type your question into the chat box. So we'll take as many questions as we can. If we run out of questions before noon, more time for you before you maybe go grab lunch or head to your next meeting or call. And if we find that we're running out of time, we will do our best to follow up by email, and you can find our contact information as well on officefoodwastechallenge.org. So let's check the questions list and see what we've got going. Give me just a moment. Okay, so our first question is, do you track liquid waste as well? So this is an issue, for example, with coffee cream.
So I'll take that one, and Lucas, feel free to chime in. Lucas helps organize all of our quarterly waste audits, and when we do sort the waste, we do often find things like soda bottles with liquid in them still. So we do our best to track the liquid. So if we can, if the liquid is mostly full and it's not just droplets, we will put it into the food waste side. One of our tips for our sorters is that whatever is the heaviest portion of the combined waste piece that they're trying to sort is, that's where we'll skew. So if there is soda, if there's creamer in a container, we'll tend to put that in the food waste for the weighting portion, and then after our sorting process, we'll fix it. We'll pour out the liquid and then put the container in the proper sorting bin.
Great. We had a great question on what was the most critical element of success, do you think?
Well, the most critical element was really to reach the target and to change the awareness among us as staff, because we are also advocates around where we are in our daily life. So changing habits and also be more aware of why we have food waste and how we can combat it at a very practical level was really a success criterion, because a lot of people maybe feels that it's a difficult task to engage in the global challenges as a whole, but this is very, very practical at an individual level. So that was a success for us, that we have succeeded with that.
Great.
Okay, and maybe I can add a little bit to that. I think Shengyin touched on this a lot, but really the sort of continual engagement with staff is a really important piece. And that comes in many forms, because especially with sort of waste management and addressing food waste, people really need to be constantly reminded, to be constantly aware and mindful of what they're doing and how they can reduce it. So really things like good signage, sharing data on how we're doing toward meeting our targets, all of that is really important to continually engage staff and sort of keep it in their minds as they go about sort of their work and their like lunches and everything. So that continual engagement is really a key success factor. And the fact that we have these waste audits every quarter, and it's mostly staff volunteers who help us with it, that also contributes to that piece as well.
Great, thank you both. Our next question is, how did you design your compost signs, i.e. to reduce contamination, reduce the moral licensing of composting? Some research has shown that having compost allows people to feel that wasting food is more okay. Did you find this at all?
The compost signs were actually an iterative process. So we're on our third design variation now. Part of it is that we try and keep our signage pretty straightforward when it comes to the compost bin. So there is a level of informative signage that we have, which really focuses on what's compostable. And then to keep things salient, as Lucas and Esben had noted, the engagement side, we do create posters and other visualizations that change periodically. And those focus on different benefits around food waste reduction and composting. So we really haven't found too many issues in terms of the compost signage being the same signage that then also offers the reasons why people should be doing that. We keep the signage very informational as an ongoing piece. We get to the reasons why in other forms, and I don't think we've had too many kind of pushback moments in terms of the reasons. A lot of it is that our organization, our audience, buys into it. So we don't need to do too much on all the environmental, social, and other benefits around composting. But that said, understanding your audience and designing your engagement campaigns around an audience can be really important. Understanding what the areas are that are barriers for them to compost, and then putting that in the scope of overall action. So the food waste campaign isn't its own campaign. It's part of the larger walking the talk efforts. So there are other messages in other campaigns around how you reduce waste at the source. So composting isn't the only answer, and it's not the thing that is driving people to just throw their food right out in the compost and feel good. We ask people to think about it from the beginning to the end, and then offer the signage as a nudge or a final reminder to sort after they've reduced the food waste at the front end.
Thanks. Next question is, do you set any guidelines for your caterer? Is there any penalty if they don't comply with the guidelines? What about event conduct outside of the office?
Oh, yes. Caterers. So that can be an interesting process. We're not a huge organization. Our events are not huge dollar events often. We do have a few. What we've done is more of, I'd call it an engagement push with our different caterers. We've done a number of outreach activities with them to interview and ask them to complete sustainability questionnaires. So we find that caterers that are willing to work with us, tell us more about their overall practices, how they handle food waste at other events in their own kitchens, are more willing to work with us for our events and handle compost properly, provide the right disposables, offer reusable materials. So our approach isn't to mandate that they all follow. We try and create a list of caterers that we know are already doing this, and then we work with them for our big events. That said, we also know there are a number of smaller catering companies and food vendors. We work with them as well for quick service meetings and smaller events, and we try and nudge them along as well. So when they don't offer compostable materials, when they don't do food waste recovery, we send them materials, we ask them to, and we tell them that we're more likely to work with them if they are willing to change their operations.
Thank you. Next question, do you have a return on investment or business case to help convince companies it's worth doing? So Shengyin, maybe you can talk about if WRI has seen any savings within its office, and then Esben, if you want to talk about some of the reports that Champions 12.3 has produced.
Okay, I'll start. So for our efforts, cost isn't the primary driver when we do our return on investments, and there is a case to be made that the return on investment calculation itself isn't always capturing the full picture of issues. When we started to do our food and catering policy, which covers efforts from vegetarian food all the way to food waste, we did find that there were price variations. So it's not always the same cost to get all vegetarian, to make sure you get the right disposables. And when you rent reusable items, it can come at more of a cost. But that said, we see a lot of return in terms of just the reputational side of things. When we hold a big event, we want to make sure our event reflects the actions that we tell our guests we're promoting. On the other side of things, though, the food waste piece and the source reductions do save us money. When we order less food and we have less food waste, that's an immediate cost savings.
Yeah, and Jillian just touched about Champions 12.3, and that is an international coalition of influencers that have committed to fight food waste at a global plan. And in this work, and you can see the resources about Champions 12.3 by Googling it, you'll see that a lot of analysis have been done on what can you actually save as an organization if you do this with a strict focus. And I think it's obvious to most of us here that lowering your food waste as an organization, as a company, there is of course a business case. And if you haven't focused on it at all, there's a lot of low-hanging fruits to be dealt with. At the same level for countries, for those of you that engage at a governmental plan, there's a lot of strategies that can be pushed at a governmental level, engaging with big kitchen and cantinas, public kitchens, schools, institutions, and so forth that can be public driven. So there's also a focus there to be targeted at.
Thank you. And to Esben's point about Googling Champions 12.3, the website is champions123.org, and there you can find a publication on the business case for reducing food loss and waste, which was published, I think, about 2 years ago now, and looked across sectors and found, I believe it was a 14-to-1 savings for reducing food loss and waste. And there have since been 3 sector deep dives into the catering industry, the hotel industry, and just recently, a couple months ago, Champion's 12.3 released a report on restaurants cutting food waste, finding a 7-to-1 savings. So our next question is, have we launched a food waste week to engage employees? And if so, what do you think were or would be the most important components of such an initiative?
Sure. So we haven't launched a food waste week specifically, but we do have these continuous campaigns, and they're very much linked to our zero waste initiative. So we sort of have campaigns focused on minimizing source reduction, going plastic free, and then minimizing food waste. So these are things we sort of take turns playing off between. And as Shengyin has mentioned, they're very complementary. Sort of the things that people do to reduce their source waste also goes often toward reducing the amount of food waste that they produce in the end.
Great. Next question, have you implemented a labeling system or notification for staff with uneaten food in the fridge? And did you implement any plant-based catering office policies?
We do not have a labeling system for the food in our fridge. I think it's generally an honor system here, and I'm sure there are conflicts that I'm not aware of on a daily basis. That said, we do the monthly fridge cleanouts, and we do make it very clear every month when it's happening. And then on top of that, we've been working with the janitors to do the proper sorting out of the waste from the fridge. On the food policy side, we do ask all of our food that WRI purchases for any small meeting up to a very large event to be vegetarian and plant-based.
I think just to supplement that, the key here is really to keep it simple when you launch this in the office, and don't make it more complicated as needed. For us, it has been really straightforward here. Of course, there has been small challenges on during the process, and as Lucas touched upon, we need to remind people of the task in between from time to time. But really, the key word is keeping it simple.
And the actual monthly notifications about the fridge being cleaned out, those are actually really effective. It just comes through email and it tells you the date when it's going to be cleaned out. And it's such a simple thing, but you actually see staff going to the fridge to check whether they sort of have any food left uneaten, or actually putting Post-its on food that they want to keep and will actually last beyond that, so that our custodial staff don't throw it out. And so, as Esben said, it's just really these simple continual measures that are really helpful.
And to add to the simple piece a little, I think also fun. A lot of times mandates can put sort of a chore sort of framework to the activities. But when we do our campaigns, a lot of times we're trying to make it just fun. We do sorting activities with a spin wheel. We offer candy to folks that have the answers correct. When the monthly emails come in about the food waste reminder, there's usually a fun little image that our facilities manager adds to it. And really, we're trying to engage people to want to join us in doing this, rather than to constantly tell them that they have to do this. Part of it is turning it into something fun, reinforcing that habit, and then it just becomes baked in.
Thank you. Next question, is there any evidence that staff have taken learnings from the office campaign back to the home?
I definitely think so. We, in addition to our food waste and our zero waste efforts, we do a number of sustainability evaluations with our staff. Part of our performance reviews are actually tied to the way staff report on their sustainable actions, both at home and at work. And we've heard a lot of comments and feedback that the activities that we run for food waste and zero waste sorting are translating to home as well. And we encourage that, because you don't want to have to change your habits and your mindsets and your sorting from one place to the other. It really is a continual learning piece.
Mm-hmm. And there has been sort of demand from staff to have more resources on home composting. Mm-hmm. So I think definitely having compost introduced to the office has generated a lot of interest internally for people. Like, how do I bring this back home? How do I reduce food waste at home? And so that's something we work on providing as well. We do brown bag lunches, send out resources through email. And some people even will bring their compost into the office sometimes if they're unable to do it at home. So it definitely has generated that interest.
Yeah, I'll say anecdotally for me personally, I feel like I'm a lot more mindful about what I throw out at home because it is such a focus here at work too. Next question is, how long does it typically take to sort the waste? And has anyone expressed concerns over privacy?
So typically the waste audits will take about 2 hours. And so these are done internally with staff volunteers, and adding to the fun bit, making this sort of an engaging activity, we offer like pizza and beer at the end while we go through the data, because the data is sort of on this dashboard, and once we input it, we can sort of see the results immediately. So that data tracking and the food and sort of the being able to spend time with each other makes it a very engaging activity for people, and also very educational.
I don't think we can say that there's been any privacy issues around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's trash, you dig through it, and that's what it is.
Yeah, staff are also aware that we do have regular waste audits.
Yeah, that's the challenge of our waste audits. Our internal waste audits require staff volunteers, which means they're not a surprise. So there is the possibility for our quarterly ones that people are holding on to their waste or maybe making it a little bit more of a minimal waste day. We do work with our building management company to do a building-wide waste audit as well every 2 years. And on the privacy piece, our office, when we did our renovation, we structured the bins so that we don't have individual waste bins. Staff have to go to key stations around the office to do their waste recycling and compost sorting. And so that really anonymizes it a little. We won't be able to tell who generated what piece of waste as well.
Do you include parts of the food that are typically uneaten in your food waste measurements, such as skin, seeds, bones, etc.?
Yes. So when we actually say we've reduced food waste to under 3 pounds, that includes sort of non-edible food waste. And what we're finding during our waste audits is it's actually mostly unedible food waste. So things like apple cores, peels, eggshells, bones, items like that.
Thanks. Have you considered having cooking classes for staff so they can learn how to use food scraps when cooking at home, such as pineapple cores, tops of peppers, or carrot peels?
Yes, I mentioned that this has a lot of alignment with our other sustainability activities. And one of the activities that actually started with staff volunteer is our zero waste potluck. And with that potluck, we encourage staff to make a serving for 3 or 4, trying to minimize waste as much as possible from the packaging all the way to using creative ingredients like apple skins, potato skins, etc. And then we share that food with each other and then share the recipes as well. So we don't quite do the cooking class, but we do share our techniques as well. And we've learned a lot. The definition of inedible is a tricky one. You know, what looks inedible to us, such as the apple skins and potato peels, can turn into something really creative and delicious with somebody else.
How do you feel about use-by dates on non-dairy and meat? This person wrote that her understanding is that this is often overly cautious.
Yeah, that's a general question, and the thing that we see around the world as a challenge. At the moment in the European Union, they work on changing legislation, and you see it in other countries as well. Again, here it's using a normal approach to food: smell it, taste it, find out if it's good, and of course have some cautious about it. But really, the challenge in a lot of places is, do you follow these labels very strictly? Then it will add to the food waste. And if you use your mind in a healthy way, well, then you can spend much more of the food than you think.
Great, thank you. Just looking through your questions now to see what else we can answer for you. Just a reminder too that you can ask a question by hitting the hand sign or typing it into the chat function. So here's a question. Do you have signage available on your resource page to print and put up in our offices? And the answer to that, I think, is no, but it's a great suggestion, and it's one that we could probably look into and come up with something. So thanks for that. Thanks for that idea. How long does it typically take to sort the waste? And how often are you doing it each year?
So our waste audits take about 2 hours on average to go through the entire office's waste, recycling, and compost. And we do these quarterly, so we do them about every 3 months.
I don't think we've asked this one yet. What's the cheapest way to weigh food waste? And do you recommend any equipment in particular?
Their way is probably pretty cheap. We bought a scale on Amazon for about $20. A quick little pro tip is that the measuring part, the part that displays the data, is actually on a cord, so you can put it up and make it more visible to you while you're weighing the waste. That's very helpful. The rest is pretty low cost. We bought some gloves, reusable kind, and some tongs. And since our first waste audit, we've actually been reducing the amount of materials. We also track the waste audits waste. And previously we had been using a tarp for any spills in the process, but we found that that wasn't necessary. The flooring in our cafeteria worked just fine, working with our facilities manager and monitoring that after a few audits. So that helped to reduce the cost as well. In general, I'd say it's the cost of a scale, some gloves, pizza, and beer.
One more question on audits. Do you make a point of changing the day on which you do them?
Yes, so we actually do make a point to change the day, just to get an even spread of different days of the week, see like what's being collected. We also do avoid Friday. In particular, that's just a day when there's generally less waste being generated because there tend to be more staff who are teleworking and fewer people in the office, so we want something that's more representative. And also, there are also external events that are sometimes in the office and where we have more catering, and so the waste audits just sort of randomly line up with those. So yes, we do.
So this is a bigger picture question. What were the main challenges that WRI has faced in engagement?
Well, our challenge is probably not that big because we have a lot of staff that are very focused on sustainable living in general. So pushing from having a bottom-up process around this, but also a big support from our leadership here at WRI has really pushed this agenda forward. And this will, of course, differ from country to country, area to area. But in general, as a CSR policy in a company, in a country, the moral issue about wasting food is of course evident and is needed to be discussed as a part of company policy in general. So besides the moral obligation, then also pushing for actions and awareness among staff is very helpful.
Yeah, I'd say our staff are very inclined to care about the environmental and societal impacts of food waste. At the same point, though, as we've done these waste audits, we've learned little things that have been engagement challenges, but they are really interesting opportunities for us to learn. So when we do those waste audits, we discover particular materials that are very challenging, right? So our lunch containers from takeout places, when we are sorting them as part of the waste audit, we find that we have a hard time figuring out where they're supposed to go because they're made out of composite materials or they don't have clear markings on them. And not being the one that bought that, we don't have those details of how to properly handle that waste. So I think the biggest challenge on our end in the program implementation side are those materials and shifting the conversation from what do you do with this when you're sorting to how can we avoid bringing these in the office entirely.
Thanks. And just a reply from the audience to a question we had a few minutes ago on do we have signage available on our website. Someone replied that www.stopwaste.org/signmaker has a customizable sign maker tool available to print your own office, school, or signs for events. So that sounds like a great resource. So our next question is, what language have you used in your communications to say that composting is okay, but source reduction is better?
I wouldn't say that it's a all-for-one sign that covers all of that. Source reduction is a really tricky thing. You know, I think you need to get people at their decision-making point, and oftentimes you can't present them with a sign when they're ordering food. So really, it's an ongoing engagement activity for the source reduction piece. Having events, having conversations, having champions, a champions network, essentially staff that are very dedicated to doing our sustainability initiatives, become ambassadors and points of resources for various staff. So through that, we get the message out that, oh, hey, you're doing an event. Can I help you reduce the food waste by ordering less food, by pointing you to vendors that we know offer platters rather than lunchbox kits, and many other techniques. For the compost piece, then it's that last minute sign nudge. So I'd say that the strategy differs depending on the message. You know, the source reduction isn't always effective as a sign, but compost and making sure people are sorting correctly is a sign, or is a visualization, that is.
Our next question is, do you push for local seasonal produce as well, taking into account the carbon footprint of the food or drink?
So that one's a little bit trickier. We have, as I mentioned, when we work with our vendors, a very long sustainability checklist we ask them to fill out. And initially, when we started to do that data collection with the local DC-based vendors, we weren't necessarily sure what we would get. Some vendors are very open about sharing their ingredient sourcing and their data, and they track it. Others just don't know, and they just order through your typical Fisco. So that's been a bit of a challenge. We want to see more vendors go organic, go seasonal, go local, but as a general whole, our food policy, and to work with the specific caterers that we have, we prioritize offerings of vegetarian food. So if a vendor, as a baseline requirement, offers 3 vegetarian entrees or more, ideally, then we work with them. And then from there, we ask questions about ingredient sourcing, energy, waste management, community practices. But it's not the top baseline requirement. But then our staff are very conscious about that kind of thing. And so through things like our potlucks and our CSA that our staff organize as well, I think local, organic, seasonal does come up a lot in terms of our general food selection.
Great. Well, looking at the list of questions that we've received so far, it seems like we've hit just about all of them. So just a reminder, if you have another question you'd like to ask, you can type it into the chat box or hit the hand sign. And in the meantime, I will give our speakers an opportunity to close out with any final thoughts if they have them.
Yeah, from the sustainability initiative perspective, I would say that echoing what we've had said already in the past 45 minutes, simple and fun. You know, I wouldn't take this as a huge hurdle. There are very practical, easy to accomplish, low cost actions, and really getting people involved, utilizing their passion, and making it interesting and exciting for them to participate.
And also a joy that you actually can do things both in the office but also in your private sphere, because the best way of fighting food waste is of course with your shopping cart, private household, so you don't buy too much. But here in the office the conditions are different, but we have really experienced the joy about being able to do something about this in a very easy way.
All right. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining today's webinar. Just a reminder that we've been recording this and it will be available on the events page on WRI's website. And the website, again, to find the resources that have been talked about is officefoodwastechallenge.org. We're happy to take any questions you have offline as well. Please think of our staff as a resource for you, and we hope that you will sign up to this new Office Food Waste Challenge. Thanks very much.